In this last video, you're going to learn about learners' misconceptions and factors that influence long-term memory retrieval. Let's first talk about misconceptions. So in this, the first learning objective is that you'll be able to explain how students' self-constructed beliefs or misconceptions can sometimes interfere with effective learning and identify several ways of helping students productively revise such beliefs. So we are going to learn about the misconceptions and how we can address them. Again, students' prior knowledge are usually facilitative when it comes to learning new knowledge or gaining new knowledge, but it can be it can interfere one's learning if they are misconceptions. Then what are misconceptions? These are the beliefs that are inconsistent with accepted and well-validated explanation. For instance, young children can believe that world is flat and plants eat soil and fertilizer while the plants produce the energy by photosynthesis, not eating soils or fertilizer. And so, like this misconception can also be held by older students, like grade 9 to 12 students may think that division always leads to smaller number. This is not true for your information, because if we divide the number with the number that is smaller than 1, it can lead to a bigger number, right? And this kind of misconceptions can be individually and or culturally constructed. And again, misconceptions often inhibit new learning. And changing these misconceptions can be more difficult and challenging than you think. It's because students' existing beliefs affect their interpretation of new information. So, because of their own misconceptions, it could be hard for them to accept and accommodate new information. And people have a confirmation bias. Also, students' existing beliefs may be more consistent with everyday experiences. I mean, I can understand why young children believe that Earth is flat because the land that we see every day is quite flat, and especially if they're from Ohio or Columbus, I can definitely see why they think the Earth is flat. And some beliefs are integrated into a cohesive whole. Another example of misconception was that young children think that plants actually eat soil and fertilizer, which is not true. But you know how they would observe the people, their adults, friends are consuming food and how their pets like dogs and cats eat food. So for them, it would make more sense, and the beliefs that plants eat soil and fertilizer is more consistent with their interpretation of the world. And because of these misconceptions, students may fail to notice inconsistencies between new information and existing beliefs. There are some cases where students may have personal or emotional investment in existing beliefs. Like, for instance, how many of you have been shocked by your older siblings or parents saying that there's no Santa Claus? That was quite shocking to me, and I held that misconception that Santa existed quite for a while, even though these mean adults and older siblings kept telling me that it's a misconception. But anyway, okay, and there is a good video that talks about what misconceptions are. So I'm going to show you a video.
Ah, here they come, our students, just brimming with enthusiasm and highly contagious stomach bugs. Each one a blank slate, a pristine sponge ready to soak up every new idea presented by the teacher and parroted back verbatim on test day. Now that's good learning.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
But of course it is. I'm the omniscient narrator. I know everything.
Yeah? What number am I thinking of?
17,369.
It was 4.
Maybe the word omniscient is a bit strong.
Look, I've been teaching for 12 years, and trust me, these students are anything but blank slates. They may be here for 8 hours a day, but for the other 16, they're in all kinds of classrooms. The dinner table, karate lessons, their sneaper peeper feed, trashy vampire novels.
Whoa, easy! They're not all trashy.
My point is that these kids are out there, living life, constantly learning things. Some of those things are good, but some, well, let me show you. Okay, class. If I were to drop these two balls at the same time, which do you think would hit the ground first?
I know this one. The basketball would hit the ground first.
And what makes you think that, Justine?
This one time, I tried to dunk confetti on my baby brother, who kind of crawls like a snail through mud. And it took forever for it to reach the ground, so I know that lighter things fall more slowly. It's basic physics.
But her answer's all wrong. All objects fall towards Earth at the same rate, no matter what their mass. That's like Falling 101. How did Justine pick up that wrong idea?
Sounds like she got it by observing everyday life. The important thing is, right now that wrong idea makes more sense to her than the correct one. It's called a misconception.
Well, just give her the right answer and the misconception will go away.
It ain't that simple.
Who is that?
The guy who's been sticking around this school since you were in diapers. The name's Gummerson. I know, it's a little on the nose. Here's the deal, Jack. Children need to find ways to make sense of the world around them. We all do. And those ways of thinking are called mental models. Without these models, the world would feel like one bloomin' buzzing confusion. Mental models help us create order out of that confusion. Think of them as our own internal private explanations for why things are the way they are, and do what they do. How do plants grow? How do whales communicate? How can anyone dislike cilantro? Ugh! Hate that stuff. Oh, boy. These mental models might be flawed or even completely wrong. But as long as they make it easier to navigate our day-to-day lives, we're reluctant to let them go. They're sticky, like me.
So then, how can a teacher get students to actually learn new concepts?
So, how can we change students' misconceptions? Well, we can begin by identifying misconceptions before instruction begins. So, I'm going to elaborate this with the most commonly held misconception, which is about learning style. So, to many of your surprise, learning style actually has a very feeble scientific backing. So there is almost no scientific evidence that supports learning style. So I have just identified the misconception. And then you need to look for or build on elements of truth in students' existing understandings. So some of you are visual learners, or some of you are auditory learners, but surprisingly, both the auditory learners and visual learners learn best when they are watching the videos rather than to listening to the audio. It is because we have learned about like dual coding theory, right? Human brain functions better when the information is coded in multiple modalities. So when we look at the text and also listen to the text, regardless of whether we are visual learners or auditory learners, we just learn best. And then convince students that existing beliefs need revision. And the reason why you need to kind of debunk the myth of learning style is that you'll become teachers. And if you stick to the misconception of learning style, you may or may not, you may unintentionally interfere with your students' learning. Motivate students to learn correct explanations. I think you guys are now motivated enough to believe that learning styles is a misconception. And of course, you need to preserve student self-esteem. Do not ridicule them for misunderstandings. And it's completely fine if you believed in learning styles. I myself, before coming to the Ohio State University, was an adamant believer of learning style because learning style is also quite popular in Korea. But after gaining new knowledge, after reading research, I came to know that there's no actually such thing as learning style. I think it should be uh, referred to as learning preferences rather than learning styles. And monitor students for persistent misconceptions. Okay, maybe I will monitor your misconceptions by, I don't know, having a quiz about learning styles or making a quiz on the final exam. But I'll try to monitor if you still believe in learning styles or not. So that was one example of how we can um, change our students' misconception. And then now we are moving to our last topic, which is long-term memory retrieval. The learning objective is that you'll be able to describe several factors that influence students' ability to recall and ways to promote their long-term memory. It starts with R. Yes, retrieval, memory retrieval. So there are several factors that affect retrieval. The first factor is connections and context. Information is learned and retrieved in a particular context, but is also interconnected. So we should associate new information with students' prior knowledge or their experiences. For instance, when I taught English, like English expressions, I try to find some like Taylor Swift songs or like Marvel movies where that expression is used, then students see the connection like, oh, like this is the expression that I'm familiar with or that I've already heard. And this is the expression that I can actually use or understand. So as teachers, we need to constantly put our effort to connect and to make the knowledge that we are trying to like convey as relevant to our students' lives. Another factor that affects retrieval is distinctiveness. Not surprisingly, learners are more likely to remember things that are unique. And that is why I kind of color-coded distinctiveness. For instance, learners may forget the formulae that they learned in chemistry course, but it is less likely that they forget what they do in a fun, salient experiment in chemistry like lab. The other factor that affects retrieval is emotional overtone. So learners are more likely to pay attention to things that are emotionally charged. So I still remember the science teacher who was in my, I think she was in my middle school. Yeah. So do you guys know Magic School Bus and Miss Frizzle? My science teacher was like that. So she was a little eccentric, but really good at teaching science. So I still remember this lesson where we learned in class about evaporation. This teacher came into the classroom with spray and she kept spraying, it was like hot summer days, and she kept spraying water to students. And it was kind of fun and like a little annoying, but because of that experiment, like because of her uh, way of teaching, like I was able to understand like, oh, the principle of evaporation, and definitely that is stuck to my memory. And that is the reason why I can illustrate that example in this lesson. So try to make your learners emotionally engaged in the learning and hopefully in a positive way, like happy, enjoyable, like delighted, with this kind of happy, positive emotions. The other three factors that affect retrieval: practice, of course, practice, practice. When learners continue to practice things they have already mastered, they eventually achieve automatically. So I have a friend who is studying in medicine, and you know these very hard Latin words like anaphylacsis or some kind of gastronomic something. Like I'm always so amazed at how my friend he is just good at all these kind of Latin languages. And I asked a very stupid question like, how are you able to like memorize all these difficult um like terms? And he talked to me that like hey, but you should know how to you know how to say Wingardium Leviosa and like expecto patronum or protego maxima, all this even more difficult Latin words. And the reason why I was able to say these complicated Latin words is because I practiced, um, whether implicitly or explicitly. I just listened to that. I watched a lot of Harry Potter movies, and I say those words out loud. So if you practice enough, if you have enough practice, it becomes more like solidly anchored in the long-term memory. And the relevant retrieval cues can also influence long-term retrieval. So cues can help to start the search of long-term memory in the right direction. So if your students are having difficulties retrieving some memory, you can give some kind of cues or hints um, in your class. And wait time is also important when it comes to retrieval. So if I ask a question, for instance, define misconception now, then even though you have a very solid understanding of misconceptions, you may be bewildered and embarrassed, right? So, as everyone, our students would need time to think, and we need to make sure that we give enough wait time so that students can actually retrieve the information. And effective teachers use this wait time to modify instruction. When the learning objective is simple recall, teachers may give shorter wait time. However, if teacher wants students to engage in more complex cognitive processes, then teachers should give more wait time. All right, that's it for this video. And please submit your reflection regarding misconception